At 55, I had it all. $1 million portfolio, a successful law firm, and a life that looked perfect on paper. Then, my own son and his wife turned the tables on me, stripping away everything. The mansion, the luxury cars, even my own bank accounts. I was left with nothing, eventually fleeing to another state to start over as a courthouse janitor. Nobody there knew I had once been a high-powered attorney, but then one day, I saw an elderly man standing before the most aggressive prosecutor in the state, completely defenseless and facing a trial that would ruin him. I dropped my mop. "Your Honor, I'll be representing him." They all laughed at me. But within 20 minutes, I'd picked apart the prosecution's case and cleared his name. When the judge realized the man I'd just saved was actually a major media mogul, the color drained from his face. "I'm so glad you're here. Please stay with me until the very end, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. My name is Elma. At 55, I thought my life was perfectly mapped out. I owned a $3 million estate on Oak Ridge Avenue, drove a Mercedes that cost more than most people made in a year, and had built a legal practice bringing in $2 million annually. Most importantly, I was convinced that I had raised a son who loved me. I couldn't have been more wrong. The morning everything fell apart started like any other Tuesday. I was in my home office reviewing contracts when Jasper walked in. He was 32, dressed in a designer suit, looking polished as always. He had inherited my sharp features, but unfortunately none of my work ethic. Still, he was my only child, and for years I'd told myself his sense of entitlement was just a phase. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, taking a seat in the leather chair across from my mahogany desk. Something in his tone made me look up from my files. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" He placed a thick manila folder on my desk with a look I couldn't quite read. "I've been managing your accounts for 5 years, and we have some serious issues to address." My stomach dropped. When he graduated from law school, I had given him power of attorney, thinking it would lighten my workload and teach him some responsibility. "What kind of issues?" Jasper opened the folder, revealing bank statements, investment reports, and legal documents I didn't recognize. "Your spending has completely spiraled. The mortgage on this place is $12,000 a month. Your credit cards are maxed out, and the company accounts are overdrawn." I stared at the papers, my mind racing. "That's impossible. The firm brings in over $2 million a year. There should be at least $4 million in my personal account." "There used to be," Jasper corrected, his voice dropping to a coldness I'd never heard before. "You've been living way beyond your means for years. I've been trying to control the damage, but it's too late." My hands shook as I reached for the statements. The numbers made no sense. Withdrawals of $50,000, $75,000, $100,000, amounts I never authorized, dated over the last 2 years. "Jasper, I never took this money out. I would remember." "Mom," he interrupted, his tone shifting into something condescending. "You've been so forgetful lately. Sometimes you don't even remember conversations we've had or decisions you've made. I've been covering for you, but I can't do it anymore." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Forgetful? I ran a successful law firm, handled complex litigation, and remembered every detail of my clients' lives. I was not forgetful. I never authorized these transactions. Jasper sighed, a sound filled with pity and frustration. "Lanny and I have been talking about this for months. We think you need help." The moment he mentioned his wife, my blood turned to ice. Lanny had married Jasper 8 years ago, drawn to his trust fund like a moth to a flame. At 29, she had no career and no ambition beyond spending money she hadn't earned. I'd tolerated her for my son's sake, but I'd never trusted her calculating smiles or the way she'd scan my house as if she were pricing my belongings. What does my financial situation have to do with Lanny? She's been helping me sort through all of this. "Mom, the truth is you're broke, worse than broke. There are liens on the firm, the house is 3 months behind on the mortgage, and your credit is gone." The room felt like it was spinning. This couldn't be real. I'd spent 30 years working to build this security, sacrificing my personal life and everything else to make sure I was safe. "Show me the actual account balances." Jasper pulled out his phone and opened a banking app. The screen showed my main checking account balance, $347. My savings were at zero. My investment portfolio had been liquidated. "Where did the money go?" I whispered. "Your lifestyle, Mom. The shopping trips you don't remember, investments in companies that don't exist, loans you signed for people who defaulted. I have all the records right here." He pulled out more paperwork. Credit card bills showing purchases at luxury stores I'd never visited. Investment contracts signed with a version of my signature that looked familiar but felt foreign to my touch. Loan agreements for amounts that left me breathless. "I didn't sign these," I said, though my voice sounded weak. The signatures looked like mine. The dates spanned the last few months, and Jasper's confident presentation was starting to make me doubt my own mind. "The doctor said this might happen," Jasper continued, his voice sounding rehearsed. "Early onset memory issues can cause financial confusion and poor judgment. That's why you gave me power of attorney, to protect you from yourself." Memory issues. The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence. I'd never been diagnosed with any cognitive decline. But as I stared at the evidence covering my desk, doubt crept in like poison. "What are you talking about, Jasper?" "I'm saying you need care. Professional care. Lanny and I found a wonderful facility up north. It's safe, it's comfortable, and selling the house and the remaining assets will cover the costs for a few years." My world was spinning. "You want to put me in a home?" "It's for your own good. You can't live alone anymore, and we can't keep monitoring your spending. This way you'll have round-the-clock supervision and medical support." I looked at my son, the man I'd raised, educated, and supported for 30 years, and realized I was staring at a stranger. The love in his eyes had been replaced by something calculated and cold. "And what about you and Lanny? Where are you going to live?" "We're moving into a penthouse downtown. The rent is only $8,000 a month, and it's closer to my new consultancy firm." A new consultancy firm. Penthouse rent. The pieces clicked into place like a puzzle. $8,000 a month in rent meant a level of luxury Jasper could never achieve on his own. His firm was clearly being funded by my liquidated assets. "You're stealing my money," I said, my voice barely audible. Jasper's mask slipped for a split second, revealing something ugly underneath. "I'm preserving what's left of your legacy. If you keep making these financial mistakes, you'll lose everything. This way, at least something is saved." "Saved for whom?" "For your care, Mom, and ultimately for your estate." By estate, he meant his inheritance. My son was draining my life's work to fund his lifestyle while convincing me that I was losing my mind. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. "I want to see my lead attorney. Robert Chen has handled my affairs for 15 years. He'll sort this out." "Mom," Jasper said, his voice laced with a sincerity that almost fooled me. "Robert retired 2 weeks ago. Don't you remember? You even went to his retirement party." I searched my memory but found nothing. Either I was truly losing it or Jasper was a master manipulator. "Then I'll find another lawyer." "With what money? And honestly, Mom, who's going to believe you? I have 5 years of documentation proving your judgment has been failing. Medical records showing cognitive decline, and witnesses who can attest to increasingly erratic behavior." The trap tightened around me. I realized this conversation wasn't Jasper breaking bad news. It was him unveiling a plan that had been in motion for years. The power of attorney, the gradual isolation from my professional contacts, the subtle hints about my memory. It was all a calculated performance. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because I deserve a better life than just waiting for you to pass away," he answered with shocking candor. "Lanny and I have dreams. We have plans. We shouldn't be living like paupers while you hoard millions." The cruelty of his words took my breath away. This was my child. The baby I'd sat with during fevers, the toddler I'd read bedtime stories to, the young man I'd spent $200,000 to send to law school. "You have 48 hours to pack your personal things," Jasper continued, his voice now entirely businesslike. "The house is being listed on Friday, and you'll be moved to the facility this weekend." I stared at him, trying to find any trace of the boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms or make me Mother's Day cards out of crayons and construction paper. That boy was gone, replaced by this cold stranger who discussed my life like a business transaction. "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll file to have you declared incompetent and have you committed against your will. The medical evidence is already prepared, Mom. This way is easier for everyone." Medical evidence. I wondered how long he'd spent building this case, which doctors he'd bribed or misled, what lies he'd told to create a paper trail of my supposed decline. I walked to the window and looked at the garden I'd planted 15 years ago. The roses were in bloom, their red petals vibrant in the morning light. In 48 hours, it would all belong to someone else. "Does Lanny know?" I asked without turning around. "It was her idea," Jasper said, and I heard the sound of his chair scraping against the floor as he stood up. She has a real gift for financial planning." Of course it was her. I should have seen it. The way Lanny inserted herself into family discussions about money, her subtle questions about my will, those moments I caught her photographing my jewelry and art. "I need time to process this," I said. "Don't take too long. The papers are already filed, and the facility is expecting you on Saturday morning." I heard him gathering his files, the soft snap of the folder closing, and the rustle of his expensive shoes moving across my Persian rug. At the door, he paused. "Regardless of everything, Mom, I'm sorry it had to come to this." But he wasn't sorry. I could hear the relief in his voice, the satisfaction of a plan finally coming together. After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, watching the roses sway in the breeze. By nightfall, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to any facility. I packed a suitcase with essentials, withdrew the last $347 from my checking account, and left a note for Jasper on his childhood pillow. "You won," the note read, "but you will never see me again." At 55, I left my old life behind, abandoning everything I knew with nothing but the clothes on my back and a devastating realization. My own son had ruined me. As I drove away into the night, one thought echoed in my mind. I had raised a monster, and now I had to find a way to survive his reach. 6 months after escaping my old life, I stood in a supply closet at the Riverside County Courthouse, staring at myself in a cracked mirror taped to the door. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, hands roughened by industrial cleaner, wearing a faded blue uniform with Elma stitched on the pocket. I'd driven 800 miles the first night, not stopping until my car ran out of gas in a town called Millbrook. It was a town of 15,000, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But fortunately, nobody cared about mine. It was the perfect place to disappear. The court job became my penance and my daily humiliation. $11 an hour mopping floors in places where I used to command respect as an attorney. The irony stung as I pushed my yellow cleaning cart through hallways lined with law books and past courtrooms where justice was supposedly being served. "Elma, you missed a spot in courtroom 3, my supervisor Marco called out as I stepped out of the closet. He was 45, a good man working 2 jobs to support his family. He had no idea the woman pushing the mop used to charge clients $500 an hour. "I'll take care of it," I replied, relieved that my voice no longer cracked when I talked about courthouse business. The first month was agony, hearing legal procedures I could have handled better than the attorneys on the record, watching defendants get inadequate representation while I was stuck with a mop. I pushed my cart back into courtroom 3, the wheels squeaking with every rotation. The judge had gone to lunch, but a few lawyers remained at the defense table, reviewing files for the afternoon session. I knew the type. Young public defenders. Overworked, underpaid, doing their best with impossible caseloads. "The prosecution has 12 witnesses," one of them said, her voice tight with stress. "We only have 3 days to prepare a defense for a capital case. This is insane." "Welcome to the public defender's office," her colleague replied, exhausted. "At least it isn't Thompson prosecuting. That guy would put his own mother in prison just to pad his conviction rate." Thompson. District Attorney Marcus Thompson, the most ruthless prosecutor in the county, known for his perfect record and political ambitions. I'd read about him in the local paper, a man who treated defendants as stepping stones to the governor's mansion. I started mopping around the lawyer's table, making myself invisible as I'd learned to do. People never worried about talking in front of the cleaning staff, as if we were just furniture with ears. In 6 months, I'd heard confessions, witnessed plea deals, and observed enough judicial misconduct to fill a law journal. "Did you see the news about that case in Westfield Heights?" one of the lawyers asked, scrolling through her phone. "Some big-shot attorney's son inherited $8 million after his mother was declared incompetent. Lucky bastard." My mop stopped in midair. Westfield Heights was my old neighborhood, and $8 million was close to the value of my estate. "Jasper Hernandez," she continued reading, "says here his mother had early-onset dementia and had been making erratic financial decisions. He's using the inheritance to expand his consultancy business." Hernandez. Jasper had taken Lanny's maiden name, probably to distance himself from any link to me. A smart move. It would make it much harder for anyone to track the true source of the funds. "That's a sweet gig if you can get it," the other lawyer commented. "My mom can't remember where she puts her keys, but she's sharp as a tack when it comes to money." They laughed, and I forced myself to keep mopping, my heart pounding in my chest. Jasper wasn't just living off the stolen wealth, he was publicly celebrating it. The newspaper article probably painted him as a devoted son, saving his poor, demented mother from financial ruin. "Elma, you okay?" Marco appeared beside me, his weathered face full of concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," I managed to say, realizing I was gripping the mop handle so hard my knuckles were white. "Why don't you go grab some lunch? That corner can wait." I nodded gratefully and retreated to the break room, a windowless space with flickering fluorescent lights and a coffee machine that looked decades old. I sat at a scratched formica table where the janitors ate their sandwiches, trying to digest what I'd just learned. Jasper hadn't just stolen my money, he'd rewritten history and cast himself as the hero. In his version, I was a sick old woman who needed to be saved from her own bad judgment. He was the loving son who stepped in to prevent disaster. The worst part was that I couldn't prove otherwise. I'd chosen to run instead of fight, leaving behind any evidence that might have supported my case. The medical records Jasper claimed to have were likely forged, but challenging those records would require resources I didn't have and a credibility I'd lost the moment I disappeared. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but the area code was for Westfield Heights. I answered with a trembling hand. "Hello, Mom." Jasper's voice was carefully modulated, conveying just the right amount of concern. "Mom, where are you? We've been worried sick." "We," as if Lanny had lost a moment's sleep over my whereabouts rather than enjoying my money. "I'm fine, Jasper." "Please come home. The facility has wonderful doctors. You'd be so much more comfortable there. This running away isn't helping anyone." "I'm not coming back." "Mom, you're sick. You need help. I know you're scared and confused, but we can work through this." The patience in his voice was perfectly crafted. It was the tone of someone dealing with a difficult but beloved relative. If anyone overheard this conversation, they would only hear a devoted son pleading with his mentally ill mother to accept necessary treatment. "I'm not sick and I'm not confused. I know exactly what you did. What I did was protect you from yourself. The doctor said this kind of paranoia is common with your condition. You're making up conspiracy theories because accepting the truth is too painful." His manipulation was so polished it was breathtaking. Every accusation I made would be dismissed as a symptom of my supposed illness. Every protest would become evidence of my declining mental state. "Where are you staying?" he asked when I didn't answer. "Are you eating? Did you take your medication?" "Medication?" Another lie to support his narrative. I wondered what prescriptions he'd planted in my medicine cabinet, what pharmacy records he'd forged to prove I was being treated for dementia. "I have to go," I said. "Mom, please." I hung up and immediately turned off the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely perform the simple action. Jasper had found my number, which meant he was looking for me. The thought of him and Lanny showing up in Millbrook with commitment papers and forged medical files made my stomach churn. I returned to work early, needing physical labor to distract myself. The afternoon session was about to begin, and I stood in the hall outside courtroom 3, organizing my supplies while keeping one ear tuned to the proceedings inside. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls its first witness in the People versus Rodriguez." I knew the case. I'd been following it through courthouse gossip for 2 weeks. Miguel Rodriguez, 68, accused of embezzling pension funds from the construction company where he'd worked for 30 years. The evidence was circumstantial, but DA Thompson had a gift for turning thin cases into slam dunks. The defendant was the only person with access to the pension fund accounts, Thompson was arguing. Financial records show a systematic withdrawal of $400,000 over 18 months, which perfectly aligns with the timing of his gambling debts. Through the open door, I could see Rodriguez sitting at the defense table. He was a small man with calloused hands and tired eyes. Representing him was a court-appointed lawyer who looked like a fresh law school grad. "Mr. Rodriguez," Thompson continued during cross-examination, "are you asking this jury to believe that someone else accessed your password-protected computer, used your personal password, and stole money from an account only you controlled?" "I don't know how it happened," Rodriguez answered, his voice barely a whisper. "I never took that money. I worked 40 years for my pension. Yet you owed $40,000 to an underground casino. What a coincidence." The defense attorney made a weak objection, but the damage was done. I could see it on the jurors' faces. They had already decided Rodriguez was guilty. The evidence was circumstantial, but the story Thompson was building was compelling and easy to understand. As I listened to the proceedings, a familiar fury welled up inside me. This was exactly what had happened to me. The only difference was that the crime had been financial exploitation within my own family. My motive had been greed and entitlement rather than gambling debts. Rodriguez was being framed by a prosecutor who cared more about a conviction rate than the truth. Meanwhile, I was being systematically erased by a son who had spent years planning my destruction. The only difference was that Rodriguez at least had a defense attorney, however inadequate. I had nothing but a mop and a belly full of resentment. That night, I sat in my studio apartment, $400 a month, 2 rooms, a kitchenette that smelled perpetually of the Chinese restaurant downstairs, and stared at the one framed photo I'd salvaged from my old life. It was a picture of 5-year-old Jasper on Christmas morning, hugging the stuffed dinosaur I'd given him, his face radiating joy. Where did that happy child go? When was love replaced by calculation? I searched my memories for warning signs, for moments when I could have foreseen this betrayal, but I found only the normal frustrations of raising a privileged child. Maybe that was the problem. I'd given Jasper everything: the best schools, expensive clothes, a car for his 16th birthday, tuition for college and grad school, even a generous allowance that stretched well into his 20s. I wanted him to have the advantages I never had. Instead, I created a monster who viewed my success as something he was entitled to inherit. The irony was crushing. I'd spent 30 years working 70-hour weeks, sacrificing relationships and personal happiness to build wealth that would secure my son's future. In the end, I had simply financed my own demise. My phone buzzed. A text from that number in Westfield Heights. "Mom, I've hired a private investigator. Please call me back before this gets more complicated." The threat was clear. Jasper didn't intend to let me disappear quietly. He needed to lock me away in that facility to complete his narrative of a dutiful son caring for a sick mother. As long as I was free, I was a loose thread that could unravel his meticulously crafted lies. I deleted the message and walked to the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection again. The woman looking back at me was tougher now, leaner from physical labor and stress, but her eyes were clearer than they had been in months. For 6 months, I'd been hiding in this courthouse, mopping floors and listening to other people's legal battles. I'd told myself I was just surviving, just scraping by until I could figure out what to do next. But as I stood there, thinking about Miguel Rodriguez and his rigged trial, about the millions Jasper had stolen and the forged medical records, and about all the injustice I witnessed in these hallways every day, I realized something important. I was done hiding. I'd been watching and learning. Tomorrow, when an older man in an expensive suit walked into courtroom 3 to face the most ruthless prosecutor in the system with nothing but a public defender, I would find out exactly what I had learned. In that moment, everything would change. In that moment, Elma the janitor would die, and something much more dangerous would be born. They had no idea who was cleaning their floors. At exactly 2 p.m. on Wednesday, the man walked into courtroom 3. I knew instantly that he didn't belong there, or at least he shouldn't have been in the defendant's chair. He was tall and distinguished, in his early 70s, with silver hair groomed to perfection, and a charcoal suit that cost more than my annual salary. His leather briefcase was slightly worn but clearly high-end, the kind of piece that ages gracefully rather than falling apart. Everything about him screamed wealth, power, and influence, except for one detail. He was sitting alone at the defense table, while District Attorney Marcus Thompson was sharpening his knives, ready to secure another easy conviction. I parked my cleaning cart in a conspicuous spot near the back of the courtroom, pretending to organize my supplies while actually observing the trial. The bailiff announced the case, the People versus Henry Blackwood, charged with financial fraud and elder abuse. The irony was palpable. They were actually charging a 78-year-old man with elder abuse. "Where is your counsel, Mr. Blackwood?" asked Judge Patricia Wells. She had been on the bench for 20 years and had seen every courtroom stunt imaginable. There was a flicker of impatience in her voice. "I dismissed him yesterday, Your Honor," Blackwood replied, his voice steady and educated. "I've chosen to represent myself." A ripple of whispers went through the courtroom. Pro se defendants were rare in felony cases, and someone voluntarily waiving representation while facing 20 years in prison was unheard of. Thompson was practically licking his lips. His perfect conviction record was about to get another entry, and this time, it wouldn't even be a challenge. "Your Honor, the prosecution is ready to proceed. Mr. Blackwood, I strongly advise you to reconsider your decision to represent yourself. These are very serious charges that could lead to a long prison sentence." I understand, Your Honor. I am ready to proceed. Judge Wells sighed and ordered the prosecution to deliver its opening statement. I'd seen Thompson in court before. He was dramatic, persuasive, and utterly ruthless. Watching him dismantle an elderly defendant without a lawyer was like watching a professional boxer beat up a child. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thompson began, his voice echoing through the courtroom, "the defendant sits before you today because greed knows no age. Henry Blackwood systematically defrauded investors out of $2.7 million, targeting the very people who trusted him with their retirement savings. I listened as Thompson painted Blackwood as a predator who used his reputation and charm to convince elderly investors to pour their life savings into a fraudulent investment scheme. According to the prosecution, Blackwood created shell companies, forged documents, and funneled millions into offshore accounts. The evidence will show that Mr. Blackwood lived a life of luxury funded by stolen money, while his victims struggled to meet basic needs. He bought luxury cars, traveled the world, and purchased high-end real estate, all while knowing the people who trusted him were losing everything. It was a compelling story, and I could see the jury hanging on his every word. Thompson had a gift for making complex financial crimes simple and personal. He wasn't just prosecuting a fraud, he was avenging grandparents who had been stripped of their dignity. When Thompson finished his opening, Judge Wells turned to Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, would you like to deliver an opening statement?" The old man stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with the fluid grace of someone used to public speaking. When he spoke, his voice filled the courtroom without effort. "Ladies and gentlemen, District Attorney Thompson has just told you a story about greed and betrayal. It's a good story, compelling, easy to understand, and emotionally satisfying. Unfortunately, it isn't true." I found myself leaning forward, pulled in by his words. Most Pro-C defendants were either mentally unstable or too poor to afford a lawyer. Blackwood was neither. The truth is far more complicated than Mr. Thompson wants you to believe. Yes, for 15 years I managed investments for dozens of clients. Yes, some of those investments lost money, but the money did not end up in my pockets. It was stolen by someone else, someone who used my trust and reputation to gain access to client funds. Blackwood's opening was short and effective. He didn't deny the basic facts. The money was gone. The investors had lost their savings. But he positioned himself as another victim, not the perpetrator. The first day of testimony unfolded as expected. Thompson called a string of elderly victims who described how Blackwood had convinced them to invest their life savings. Every story was heartbreaking. A retired teacher who lost her pension, a widow who entrusted her late husband's insurance money to Blackwood, an elderly couple facing foreclosure because their investment evaporated. Mrs. Eleanor Hartley, 82, testified from her wheelchair, explaining how she'd turned over her entire $350,000 retirement savings to Blackwood. "He said it was a guaranteed return," she whispered into the microphone. "He promised my money would be safe." "Where is that money now, Mrs. Hartley?" Thompson asked gently. "It's gone, all of it. I live on Social Security now, $800 a month. I had to sell my home." The jury was clearly moved. 2 women were crying, and several men looked like they wanted to go up and punch Blackwood. This was Thompson's specialty, turning financial fraud into an emotional drama. When it came time for cross-examination, I expected Blackwood to fumble. Most Pro-C defendants either asked irrelevant questions or gave long speeches instead of questioning the witness. But Blackwood surprised me. "Mrs. Hartley, I want you to know how sorry I am for your loss," he began. "You trusted me, and I failed to protect your investments. It is something I will regret for the rest of my life." It wasn't a question, but Judge Wells allowed it. It was a subtle balance of legal acumen to acknowledge responsibility without admitting guilt. "Mrs. Hartley, you mentioned that you invested your money in something called the Meridian Growth Fund. Do you remember signing the investment documents?" "Yes, you put the documents in front of me at your office." "And do you remember who managed the day-to-day operations of that fund?" Mrs. Hartley hesitated. "Well, you did, didn't you?" "Actually, no. The fund was managed by Meridian Investment Services, an independent firm. I was merely the broker who connected investors to the fund manager." "Do you remember meeting Mr. David Meridian?" I think I did. Sometimes there was another man there." "Mrs. Hartley, I know this is difficult, but it's important for the jury to understand what happened to your money. When you decided to invest, did I specifically guarantee you would not lose money?" "You said it was safe." "But did I specifically guarantee that you absolutely would not lose money?" Mrs. Hartley looked confused. I don't fully remember how you phrased it. Blackwood was brilliant, better than many of the licensed attorneys I'd watched. He was systematically dismantling Thompson's narrative without attacking the victims or appearing callous. Instead of denying they lost money, he questioned whether he was truly responsible for those losses. Over the next 2 days, the pattern continued. Thompson methodically presented his case, building a seemingly insurmountable wall of evidence. Financial records showing the money unaccounted for, investment documents with Blackwood's signature, bank records tracing funds from victim accounts into companies Blackwood controlled. But during cross-examination, Blackwood kept chipping away at the foundation of the prosecution's case. He didn't deny the documents or contest the financial records. Instead, he focused on one question: who actually had control over the missing funds? By Thursday afternoon, I realized what Blackwood was doing. He was preparing to argue that another person, this mysterious David Meridian, was the true mastermind. Blackwood was positioning himself as another victim, someone whose reputation and client relationships had been exploited by a more sophisticated criminal. It was a high-stakes strategy that required extreme precision. If Blackwood couldn't prove Meridian's existence and involvement, the jury would view his defense as a desperate attempt to shift blame. But if he could prove Meridian had actual control over the stolen funds, reasonable doubt would seep into the prosecution's seemingly perfect case. Thompson, however, wasn't worried. During a recess, I overheard him talking to an assistant outside the courtroom. "Let the old man keep spinning his fantasies about this Meridian guy," Thompson said confidently. "We checked. There's no record of anyone named David Meridian associated with those investment firms. Blackwood is making up a scapegoat out of thin air, and the jury will see right through it." I processed this information as I continued to mop. If Thompson was right, Blackwood was either delusional or lying. But something in the old man's demeanor suggested otherwise. He didn't behave like someone spinning a desperate lie. He seemed genuinely convinced of his own innocence. Friday morning brought the last of the prosecution's witnesses, FBI agents who had investigated the missing funds and forensic accountants who had tracked the money through various shell companies. Their testimony was devastating. Every cent of the missing $2.7 million had ended up in accounts controlled by companies Blackwood owned. "The money trail is very clear," Special Agent Rebecca Morrison testified. Funds from the victim accounts were transferred to the Meridian Growth Fund, then funneled through a series of shell companies, and finally deposited into accounts belonging to Blackwood Enterprises. On cross-examination, Blackwood focused on a detail that seemed trivial to everyone else. "Agent Morrison, you mentioned that the final transfers were made electronically. Do you have a record showing who initiated these transfers?" "The transfers were authorized using Mr. Blackwood's digital signature and access codes. But do you have any evidence that I personally initiated these transfers? Surveillance footage, keystroke logs, anything that proves I was physically present when the transfers occurred?" Morrison hesitated. "Sir, the transfers were conducted using your credentials. That is how digital authentication works. But anyone with access to my credentials could have made those transfers, correct? I suppose it's theoretically possible, but..." "Thank you, Agent Morrison." It was a small victory, but I could see that at least a few jurors had taken note. Blackwood had introduced an alternative possibility, that someone had used his access codes to steal the money. The prosecution rested on Friday afternoon, and Judge Wells scheduled closing arguments for Monday morning. Over the weekend, I found myself thinking about the case constantly. Something about Blackwood's situation reminded me of my own, an older person being systematically destroyed by someone they trusted. Monday morning was gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I pushed my cart into courtroom 3. Thompson's closing argument was a masterpiece of legal theater, blending emotional appeals with a methodical presentation of evidence. "Henry Blackwood wants you to believe he is the victim here," Thompson concluded. "He wants you to believe that some mysterious David Meridian, someone no one can find, no one can identify, and no one can confirm exists, somehow stole $2.7 million while Blackwood was completely innocent. Ladies and gentlemen, that isn't reasonable doubt, that is fantasy." When Thompson sat down, the courtroom was silent, save for the sound of Mrs. Hartley weeping softly in the gallery. The jury looked convinced, and I couldn't blame them. Thompson's case was both comprehensive and persuasive. Then, Henry Blackwood stood to deliver his closing argument, and something in his posture told me he hadn't stopped fighting yet. "Ladies and gentlemen, District Attorney Thompson is right about one thing. My defense does depend on the existence of David Meridian. If I cannot prove he existed, then I am guilty of stealing from the people who trusted me. Blackwood walked to the evidence table and produced a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. But what if I can prove it? He opened the folder and produced a stack of photographs. These are surveillance photos taken from my office building over a 15-month period. The photos show a man regularly meeting with my clients, a man who had access to my office and my computer systems. I stopped pretending to clean and watched the proceedings with total focus. The photos were clear enough to see faces. They showed Blackwood with several elderly clients, but they also showed a younger man in his 40s participating in several meetings. "This is David Meridian," Blackwood continued. "These photos prove he existed, that he had access to client information, and that he was present when several investment decisions were made." Thompson jumped up immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence was not disclosed during discovery. The defense cannot introduce new evidence during closing arguments." "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Wells said sternly, "you should have submitted this evidence during your case in chief." "Your Honor, I only obtained these photos late Friday afternoon. My former security firm stored them in an archived file that wasn't easily accessible. I had to hire a computer expert to recover them." It was a plausible-sounding explanation, but Judge Wells looked skeptical. "Even so, the prosecution has a right to review and respond to this evidence. I am declaring a recess so we can get to the bottom of this." As the judge retreated to her chambers with both attorneys, I found myself staring at Henry Blackwood. Either he was a brilliant actor, or the evidence he'd just produced could completely change the outcome of his trial. But something about the whole situation felt wrong. Blackwood was too calm, too prepared. Professional criminals usually don't have backup evidence prepared behind the scenes. If David Meridian was real, why hadn't Blackwood's former lawyer used this evidence? During the hour-long recess, I watched Blackwood sitting alone at the defense table, intently studying his notes like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. When Judge Wells returned, her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Blackwood, I am allowing you to introduce this evidence, but the prosecution will have the opportunity to respond. We will resume tomorrow morning." As the crowd dispersed, I lingered near my cart, watching Blackwood pack his briefcase. There was an efficiency to his movements, the movements of someone used to high-pressure situations, and I noticed that despite the stress of representing himself in a felony trial, his hands remained steady. Just then, we caught each other's eyes across the empty courtroom, and I realized he'd been watching me too. "You're not actually a janitor, are you?" he asked quietly. My heart skipped a beat. In 6 months of hiding in plain sight, no one had looked past my uniform and cleaning cart. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You pay more attention to this case than most lawyers. You understand the legal issues, and if I'm not mistaken, you've been taking notes." I looked down, realizing I had been scribbling observations on the back of a receipt for cleaning supplies. "I find legal cases interesting." "So do I," Blackwood said, standing up and walking toward me. "I also find it interesting that someone with an obvious legal background would rather earn $11 an hour mopping floors than practice law." The conversation felt dangerous, but I couldn't walk away. "What makes you think I have a legal background?" "Because you are the only person in this courtroom who seems to understand exactly what I'm doing." His manner made me believe Henry Blackwood knew exactly who David Meridian was, and that tomorrow's testimony would change everything. But as I watched him leave the courtroom with his briefcase, his shoulders still straight despite the threat of 20 years in prison, a feeling lingered. I was about to get swept up in something much bigger than a simple fraud case. Everything about this old man was not as simple as it appeared. Tuesday morning arrived with a tense atmosphere. The veteran court reporters double-checked their equipment, and bailiffs positioned themselves strategically throughout the room. I arrived an hour early, nominally to clean, but really to process what Henry Blackwood had said to me yesterday afternoon. "You're not actually a janitor, are you?" That question had haunted me all night. In 6 months of careful anonymity, I'd convinced myself my disguise was perfect. But Blackwood had seen through it in less than a week of casual observation. If he could see through my disguise so easily, how long would it be before others did? How long before Jasper's private investigator traced me to Millbrook? When Blackwood walked into the courtroom at 7:45 a.m., I had already organized my supplies 3 times, 90 minutes before the scheduled start. Despite his dire situation, he looked impeccable. His charcoal suit was pressed, his silver hair perfectly groomed, and his confidence while carrying his expensive briefcase suggested he owned the building rather than being a man facing decades in prison. "Good morning," he said as he passed me near the railing of the gallery. "I was hoping I'd find you here." I looked around the empty courtroom, confirming we were alone. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't think we should be talking." "Why not? Because you're the staff and I'm the defendant? Or because you're hiding from someone and don't want to draw attention?" His blunt question took my breath away. "I am not hiding from anyone." "Of course you are. That's why a woman with an obvious legal background is mopping courthouse floors for $11 an hour. That's why you've been keeping detailed records of the proceedings. That's why you flinch every time someone mentions a private investigator or family betrayal." He'd observed me far more carefully than I'd realized. "What do you want?" "I want to offer you a job, and I want to tell you who I really am." Before I could answer, he opened his briefcase and produced a card case that looked like pure silver. The card he handed me was cream-colored, the embossed lettering announcing significant wealth. Henry Blackwood, Chairman and CEO, Blackwood Media Group. I stared at the card, my mind racing. Blackwood Media Group was one of the largest communications companies in the country, owning newspapers, television stations, and digital platforms across 12 states. If Henry Blackwood was truly the man on this card, his net worth would be between $500 million and $1 billion. "You're him?" I whispered. "You're actually Henry Blackwood." "Guilty as charged, which makes this fraud case rather interesting, don't you think? Why would a man worth $800 million steal $2.7 million from elderly investors?" It was a rhetorical question, but it made everything that felt wrong about this case become clear. Blackwood's calm demeanor, his sophisticated legal strategy, his willingness to represent himself. If he were actually guilty of these charges, none of it made sense. "Someone framed you," I said. "Someone who knew I had always managed small investments for old friends as a personal favor. Someone who gained access to my office systems and client information. Someone who understood my reputation and wealth would make me the perfect target for financial fraud charges. David Meridian. David Meridian is real, but that's not his real name. His real name is David Martinez. Until 8 months ago, he was my director of financial operations. He had access to all my business systems, including the computer I used to manage my personal investment portfolio." All the puzzle pieces locked together in my mind. Martinez had used his access to Blackwood's systems to steal client funds while leaving clues that pointed directly to his boss. When the fraud was discovered, Blackwood looked guilty, and Martinez had vanished. "Why didn't your lawyer raise this information?" "Because my lawyer is David Martinez's brother-in-law, Carlos Mendoza. He is one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state, and someone I trusted completely. He assured me that the evidence against Martinez was insufficient, and that our best strategy was to raise reasonable doubt about the missing funds. The scope of this betrayal was breathtaking. Martinez hadn't just stolen the money and framed Blackwood, he'd ensured Blackwood's legal counsel was someone dedicated to his conviction. That's why you fired him and decided to represent yourself. I discovered their family connection 3 days ago. My private investigator found marriage records showing that Martinez's sister married Carlos Mendoza 6 years ago. Suddenly, Mendoza's refusal to aggressively pursue Martinez made perfect sense. "But you still don't have proof Martinez actually stole the money." "Not yet, but I have something better than proof. I have David Martinez himself." I stared at him, sure I'd misheard. "Where is he?" "He's currently held in a federal detention center in Los Angeles. He was arrested 2 weeks ago for orchestrating a similar investment fraud scheme using a different identity. The FBI doesn't know yet that he's the same person who stole the money from my clients." The implications were massive. If Blackwood could prove Martinez was David Meridian, and that Martinez had been running the same investment scam under multiple identities, it wouldn't just clear his name, it would expose a much larger criminal network. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need a lawyer I can trust. And you are the only person in this courtroom who has no connection to the local judicial system. Everyone else, the prosecutor, the defense counsel, the judge, they are all part of the system that David Martinez has been manipulating for months." "I'm not a lawyer, I'm a janitor." "You were a lawyer, and from the look of your knowledge and instincts, a successful one. Something happened to you. Something involving family betrayal and financial manipulation, if I'm not mistaken. You've been hiding here, but you are still a lawyer at your core." The conversation felt surreal. Standing before me was one of the most powerful media executives in America, facing fraud charges, offering me a job just because he'd watched me mop for a week. Even if I am a lawyer, I haven't practiced in months. My license in this state isn't active either. I couldn't represent you in court even if I wanted to. Actually, you can. With the right surety, emergency bar admission for specific cases is possible. I know several judges who would approve your temporary admission if I made the request. The temptation was impossible to resist. For 6 months I'd been invisible, powerless, and forgotten. This was a chance to practice law again, to engage my brain in complex legal strategy, a purpose far greater than cleaning up someone else's mess. This was everything I'd lost when Jasper destroyed my life. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that you help me expose the truth about David Martinez. In return, I will help you take back whatever was stolen from you. My company possesses investigative resources that law enforcement would envy. We can find evidence, trace financial transactions, and uncover the conspiracy. Whatever was done to you, we can prove it. The offer was as seductive as it was terrifying. After months of hiding, Blackwood was giving me a chance to strike back at those who had ruined my life. You don't even know what happened to me. I know enough. I know you were financially successful before you fell on hard times. I know your fall involved the betrayal of family you trusted. I know you are smart, principled, and angry enough to risk everything for justice. Knowing that is enough. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a thick folder. This is the FBI report on David Martinez's arrest in Los Angeles. It contains fingerprints, photos, and the criminal history of the man who stole my client's money and framed me. I opened the folder and found myself staring at a mugshot of a man in his early 40s, dark hair, eyes filled with calculation. According to the arrest report, he had operated investment scams in multiple states using at least 4 different identities. This proves Martinez exists and that he's a career criminal, but how does this prove he is the one who stole your client's money? Look at page 7. I flipped through the file and found a financial forensic report. According to the FBI analysis, Martinez consistently used sophisticated computer programs to hack investment management systems and transfer client funds. The technical details were complex, but the basic pattern was clear. Martinez would gain legitimate access to a financial system, then use specialized software to steal funds while leaving evidence that pointed to his supervisor. He's done this before. At least 6 times in the last 4 years, always targeting elderly executives who managed small investment accounts as a personal favor. Always using his position as a trusted employee to gain system access. Always disappearing when the fraud was discovered, leaving his boss to face criminal charges. How many people has he destroyed? The 4 previous victims are currently serving time for crimes Martinez committed. 2 others died while awaiting trial. I am the first person to figure out exactly what he's doing. The scale of Martinez's operations was staggering. He wasn't just a thief, he was a serial life destroyer who specialized in targeting successful people and turning their achievements into weapons against them. Why hasn't the FBI linked these cases together? Because Martinez used different identities and targeted victims in different jurisdictions. Local prosecutors saw isolated fraud cases, not a national pattern. The FBI was focused on his most recent crimes, not the trail of destruction he left behind. But you found out. I have resources most defendants don't. Private investigators, computer forensic experts, financial analysts. When I realized my own lawyer couldn't be trusted, I started my own investigation. The morning session was 15 minutes away, but I found myself completely captivated by the evidence before me. David Martinez wasn't just a sophisticated criminal. He was a predator specializing in successful elderly professionals, using their trust and reputations against them. Mr. Blackwood, even if everything you've said is true, simply presenting this evidence today won't be enough. The prosecution will argue it's irrelevant to the specific charges against you. You need time to properly investigate these connections and prepare a sound legal argument. That is precisely why I need an attorney who understands complex financial fraud and isn't tethered to the local legal system. Someone who views uncovering the truth not as a risk, but as a mandate. People began filing into the courtroom, the court reporter, the bailiffs, early spectators. The window for our private conversation was closing fast. I need time to consider this. Of course, but while you consider, think on this. David Martinez ruined your life too, didn't he? Perhaps not directly, but someone used his playbook. They gained your trust, accessed your financial systems, and stole your wealth, all while making it look like you were the one to blame, due to poor judgment or worse. When the theft was discovered, the victim looked guilty and the true perpetrator vanished. The accuracy of his assessment was chilling. Jasper had used my trust, accessed my accounts through the power of attorney I had granted him, and stripped me of my wealth, all while constructing a narrative that made me look mentally incompetent. How did you know? Because it is the exact pattern Martinez employs. Target successful individuals who trust family or close associates, gain legal access to their financial systems, steal systematically while building evidence that the victim is responsible for their own losses. When the theft is discovered, the victim looks guilty, and the true perpetrator escapes. You think there's a link between Martinez and what happened to me? I believe Martinez has been teaching his techniques to others, training them how to destroy families from the inside while building plausible cover stories for their theft. The possibility that Jasper had been trained by someone like Martinez, that my own son's betrayal was part of a larger criminal conspiracy, filled me with a cold, sharp rage. Even if that were true, I couldn't prove it. I left everything behind when I ran. I have no evidence, no resources, and no credibility. But I do. Help me expose Martinez, and we will use the same investigative techniques to uncover the truth of what was done to you. Justice isn't just about my case. It's about stopping a criminal network that destroys families for profit. District Attorney Thompson walked into the courtroom, followed by his assistants and a team of FBI agents. The morning session was about to begin, and I needed to get back to my position with the cleaning cart. What do you need me to do right now? I need you to watch this morning's proceedings very carefully. I am going to present the evidence regarding Martinez. Thompson will fight it tooth and nail, but watch the faces of the FBI agents when they see the fingerprint matches and the criminal history report. Even if Thompson doesn't recognize the pattern, they will, and then we will see if the criminal justice system can handle the truth, or if it is too committed to the narrative they have already constructed. As I pushed my cart to the back of the courtroom, my mind raced with the possibilities. For 6 months I had accepted my fate as a victim of familial betrayal, but if Blackwood was right about Martinez training others, Jasper's destruction of my life might be part of a much larger criminal machine. The thought of a final counterattack, of using my legal skills to uncover the truth and reclaim my dignity, was intoxicating, but terrifying. Stepping out of the shadows meant risking exposure, facing Jasper's lies, and accepting that my son might be more than just a greedy betrayer. He might be a trained criminal. When Judge Wells called the court to order, I knew everything was about to change. Over the next few hours, Henry Blackwood would either prove his innocence or confirm his guilt. And depending on the outcome, I would either remain a janitor hiding from my past, or I would become an attorney again, waging a battle for justice against those who had destroyed everything I built. The choice was mine. But looking at Blackwood standing confidently at the defense table, I knew I had already decided. This man, the most powerful media mogul in the state, was about to find out he wasn't the only one systematically destroyed by someone he trusted. And David Martinez was about to find out that his victims were finally hitting back. 3 weeks after Henry Blackwood's acquittal, I stood in the law library of the Blackwood Media Group headquarters. Surrounded by legal resources on a scale I had never dreamed of accessing, the 42nd floor of this downtown tower offered a panoramic view of the city, but my focus was entirely on the documents spread across the mahogany conference table, the evidence that would finally expose the truth of my son's betrayal. The morning Henry presented the Martinez evidence was a turning point for both of us. When FBI agent Rebecca Morrison compared the fingerprints from the Los Angeles arrest record to the surveillance footage from Henry's office, her face turned pale. David Martinez and David Meridian were, without a doubt, the same person, and the FBI's own records proved he had conducted identical scams in multiple states. District Attorney Thompson had tried desperately to maintain his prosecution, arguing that Martinez's other crimes didn't prove Henry's innocence in this specific case. But when Henry's private investigator produced bank records showing Martinez using stolen funds to purchase property under another alias, reasonable doubt became reasonable certainty. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict of not guilty on all counts. But clearing Henry's name was only the beginning. As promised, he immediately turned his investigative resources toward uncovering what had happened to me. The truth we found was worse than I had imagined, yet better than I had hoped. "Elma, you need to see this," called Janet Morrison from across the library. She was one of Henry's top investigators, a former FBI agent who specialized in complex financial crimes. Her expertise had proven invaluable in tracing the links between Martinez and my son. I walked to her workstation, where 3 computer screens displayed financial records, communication logs, and surveillance footage. "What did you find?" "Your son, Jasper, attended a seminar 18 months ago called Family Wealth Management and Estate Planning. It was marketed as a legitimate financial planning workshop, but look who was hosting it." The center screen showed a photograph of the seminar's keynote speaker, David Martinez, though he was using the name David Morgan at the time. The seminar materials promised to teach participants how to protect family assets from the poor decision-making of aging relatives. My stomach churned as the pieces fell into place. Martinez was teaching people how to steal money from their own families. It gets worse. We found records of 23 people who attended that seminar. 11 of them subsequently obtained power of attorney over elderly relatives. 9 of those relatives were later declared incompetent or placed in care facilities under suspicious circumstances. The scale of the conspiracy was staggering. Martinez wasn't just stealing money directly, he was training others to destroy their own families while providing a legal cover for the thefts. Does this mean Jasper was working directly with Martinez? Janet pulled up another screen showing financial transactions. Not exactly. Martinez is smart. He maintains plausible deniability. He teaches the general techniques but lets his students implement them independently. That way, when law enforcement investigates individual cases, they see isolated family disputes rather than a coordinated criminal network. "But Jasper used Martinez's methods," I said softly. "Almost exactly. The forged medical records suggesting cognitive decline, the gradual isolation from professional contacts, the systematic liquidation of assets, the subsequent placement in a care facility. It's the exact pattern Martinez taught in his seminar." I stared at the evidence, my heart a mixture of relief that my name was being cleared and deep revulsion. For months I had wondered if I'd actually lost my memory, if Jasper's accusations of my financial irresponsibility had a grain of truth. Now I knew every moment of doubt, every instance of self-questioning had been manufactured. "What about the money? Can we track where it went?" "That's the good news," Henry said, walking into the library with a stack of his own documents. Jasper may have learned Martinez's psychological manipulation techniques, but he didn't inherit his financial mind. The funds were remarkably easy to track. Henry spread bank statements and investment records across the table. "Your original estate was valued at approximately $8.2 million. Over 18 months, Jasper liquidated $6.8 million through a series of apparently authorized transactions. But instead of hiding the money in offshore accounts or complex shell companies, he moved it directly into accounts held in his and Lanny's names. He left the money in ordinary bank accounts? Worse, he used a huge portion of it to buy real estate, luxury cars, and other assets that are very easy to track and recover. Jasper thought having your power of attorney made him legally untouchable, but he didn't understand the difference between legal authorization and criminal fraud. Janet pulled up photos of Jasper's new lifestyle. A $1.2 million penthouse, a BMW and a Mercedes totaling $150,000, and over $300,000 in designer furniture and art. "The beauty of Jasper's arrogance," Henry continued, "is that he documented everything. He kept receipts, filed insurance claims, and even paid taxes on a portion of the stolen funds. He was so confident in his legal standing that he didn't bother to hide his crimes." "Can we get the money back?" "We can recover most of it. I've filed preliminary motions to freeze Jasper's assets while the full investigation proceeds. By the end of the week, he won't be able to access any accounts or sell any property without court approval." A satisfaction I hadn't anticipated welled up in me at the thought of Jasper suddenly finding himself financially paralyzed, unable to sustain the lifestyle he'd stolen from me. For months, he'd been living off my life's work while assuming I was safely tucked away or locked in some care facility. "What about criminal charges?" "That is where things get interesting," Henry said with a smile. It was the smile that reminded me why he'd been so successful in the media industry. Jasper used techniques taught by a known criminal network to commit his crimes. That makes his case part of a larger federal investigation into the Martinez network. The FBI is very interested in prosecuting everyone who attended those seminars and subsequently defrauded family members. "Are you saying this won't be handled at the state level?" Federal charges for conspiracy, wire fraud, and elder abuse. Jasper is looking at a possible federal prison sentence of 15 to 20 years, plus full restitution of the stolen funds. The volume of work Henry had accomplished in just 3 weeks was staggering. He hadn't just cleared his own name and exposed the Martinez network, he had built an airtight case against Jasper that would result in both financial recovery and criminal justice. One more thing, Janet added, pulling up a new set of files. While we were investigating your son's finances, we discovered that his wife, Lanny, has been having an affair with one of Martinez's former business partners. They were planning to take what money they could steal and flee as soon as the heat died down. Lanny wasn't just a co-conspirator in the theft. She was actively planning to abandon Jasper, a discovery that added a layer of dramatic retribution to the entire situation. My son had betrayed me for money, and now his wife was preparing to betray him for the very same reason. Do they know we're investigating them? Not yet. We've been very careful to conduct the investigation without alerting local law enforcement or any courts Jasper might have ties to. As far as he knows, you are still missing, and his thefts remain undiscovered. Henry walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out over the city. Somewhere down there, Jasper was living in that stolen penthouse, still assuming he was untouchable. Elma, I want you to understand something important, he said without turning around. What we've uncovered isn't just about recovering your money or punishing your son. The Martinez network has destroyed hundreds of families across the country. Elderly parents who trusted their children were systematically robbed and then discarded. If we expose this conspiracy, we can prevent it from happening to others. What do you need me to do? I need you to be willing to step out of the shadows and fight this battle publicly. The evidence we've collected is solid, but the prosecutor needs the victim's testimony to ensure a conviction. That means you'll need to make public where you've been, explain why you ran, and face the people who destroyed your life. Facing Jasper again, sitting in a courtroom and watching him try to maintain the lie that I was mentally incompetent, the prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. For 6 months, I had been running from confrontation. Now I had the chance to destroy him with the truth. When do we start? Tomorrow morning. I've arranged a meeting with the federal prosecutor handling the Martinez case. She's prepared to offer Jasper a plea deal if he cooperates and names others who attended those seminars. But if he refuses, it's a full prosecution. Full prosecution. Also, Elma, there's something you should know. This federal prosecutor, you might remember her from your own legal career, Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Santos. I recognized the name immediately. When I was practicing, Maria was a brilliant young prosecutor. She was known for her meticulous case building and her hatred of white-collar crime. If she was handling this, Jasper was in serious trouble. Maria has always believed that financial crimes against family members are particularly heinous, Henry continued. She will be aggressive in pursuing this case, especially once she learns the scale of the Martinez network. That night, I returned to my studio apartment, hoping for the last time. Tomorrow, I would reclaim my true identity and begin rebuilding my life. The apartment that had served as my sanctuary for 6 months now felt small and stifling, a reminder of how far I'd fallen and how much I'd lost. But as I sat at the small kitchen table reviewing the evidence that would destroy my son's life, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. For the first time since discovering Jasper's betrayal, I wasn't reacting passively to his actions. I was dictating the terms of our final confrontation. My phone rang, breaking my thoughts. The caller ID was Jasper's number, the first time he'd tried to contact me in weeks. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. Hello, Jasper. Mom, where are you? I've been worried sick. The feigned concern in his voice couldn't affect me anymore. I knew exactly what he was doing, maintaining his narrative of the dutiful son searching for his sick mother. I'm safe, Jasper. Thank God. Mom, you have to come home. I've been looking everywhere for you. The doctor said you might become confused, that you might not remember how to care for yourself. I remember everything, Jasper, including everything you did to me. There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its warm facade. Mom, you're sick. You're inventing conspiracies, imagining things that never happened. That's part of your condition. My condition? The dementia. Mom, we talked about this. You signed the power of attorney because you were starting to forget things, making poor financial decisions. I've been protecting you. Even now, deep within the web of lies he'd woven, Jasper stuck to his story. He truly believed his fabricated medical records and forged documents would protect him from consequences. Jasper, I want you to know one thing. Tomorrow morning, federal agents will arrest you for conspiracy, wire fraud, and elder abuse. They are also going to freeze all your assets and begin the process of recovering every penny you stole from me. There was another silence. Longer this time. That's impossible. You don't have any evidence. You ran away because you were confused and afraid. No one is going to believe you over the medical documentation on file. I don't need anyone to believe my word. I have bank records, surveillance footage, and the testimony of the man who taught you how to destroy your own mother. David Martinez is cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for a lighter sentence. I heard Jasper gasp. The name Martinez clearly meant something to him. I don't know any David Martinez. The seminar you attended 18 months ago, Family Wealth Management and Estate Planning. Every technique you used on me, you learned from a career criminal who has been teaching others how to rob their own families. You're crazy, you're making all of this up. By noon tomorrow, you will be in federal custody. Your penthouse will be seized, your cars will be impounded, and every asset you bought with my money will be frozen pending restitution proceedings. Lanny might want to rethink her travel plans. The mention of Lanny seemed to break something inside Jasper. What travel plans? What are you talking about? Ask her about her relationship with David Martinez's former business partner. Ask her about her bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Ask her why she's been researching countries without extradition treaties. You're lying. Maybe, or maybe you're about to find out you aren't the only one who planned to disappear with the loot. I hung up before he could respond and immediately turned off the phone. By now, Jasper was probably calling Lanny, demanding she explain my accusations. With any luck, their panicked conversation would provide the federal prosecutor with additional evidence. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Tomorrow, justice would finally begin. Not the dramatic revenge I'd once fantasized about, but something better, a systematic uncovering of the truth and the restoration of what had been stolen. Jasper had taught me that family could be the source of the ultimate betrayal. But Henry Blackwood had taught me something equally important. Family could be chosen too. Sometimes the people who stand by you when everything falls apart are worth more than those who destroyed you for money. Everything you stole will be returned, I thought as I drifted off to sleep. And this time, you will face the consequences of your choices. 8 months after my son's arrest, I stood in the doorway of my new law firm, watching the morning sun stream through the east-facing windows and illuminate the hope I'd thought was lost forever. The brass plaque by the door read, Elma Rodriguez, Attorney at Law, Family Protection Services. Every time I looked at it, I felt a calm satisfaction, one that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with purpose. The federal prosecution of Jasper and the other 17 participants in the Martinez network had concluded 6 weeks ago. Jasper was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, plus full restitution, a sentence that reflected the severity of his crimes and his refusal to cooperate with investigators. Lanny had been arrested while attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica with $230,000 in cash and was facing federal charges of her own. I had recovered $4.2 million of the $8.2 million Jasper had stolen. The rest had been squandered on unreachable living expenses, vacations, restaurant bills, designer clothes already worn and discarded. It was enough to rebuild my life, though not enough to erase the cost of his betrayal. But sitting across from my current client, Mrs. Dorothy Hayward, I realized money had never really been the issue. The issue was trust, family, and the devastating consequences that occur when someone you love decides that you are worth more dead or incapacitated than you are alive and independent. My grandson Tommy is asking about my will again, Mrs. Hayward said, her 78-year-old hands trembling as she reached for her teacup. He says he wants to help me manage my finances, that I should give him power of attorney so he can protect me from making mistakes. Those words sent a chill down my spine. They were nearly identical to the rhetoric Jasper used when he began systematically destroying my life. Mrs. Hayward, how old is Tommy? 34. He's been unemployed for 6 months. He says the economy is too hard for young people. He's been living with me, saying he'd help with chores, but mostly he just brings women over and makes a mess of the house. And when did these conversations about your finances begin? Right after his girlfriend moved in to live with him. She's always talking about how expensive things are now, and how unfair it is that old people have all the money while the young are struggling. Clearly, Tommy's girlfriend was the driving force behind this particular conspiracy, though Mrs. Hayward hadn't realized it yet. The pattern was becoming all too familiar. Since opening my practice, I had handled 12 similar cases, all involving young relatives who suddenly developed an interest in the financial health of their older family members. Mrs. Hayward, I want you to understand something important. People who truly care about your well-being do not need power of attorney to help you manage your finances. They help because they love you, not because they want to control you. But Tommy says I'm becoming forgetful, that I might make poor financial decisions with my money. Have you made any poor decisions? She considered the question carefully. Well, no, I balance my checkbook every month, pay all my bills on time, and I have enough savings to keep me comfortable for the rest of my life. But Tommy says that could change if I get sick or become confused. So Tommy has proposed a solution to prevent that? Did he suggest that you should turn your accounts over to him, just to be safe? Did he say that if something happened, at least the money would be protected? Protected from whom, I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I opened Mrs. Hayward's file and consulted the financial assessment my investigator had compiled. Her savings totaled $670,000. Enough to attract a predator like Tommy, but not enough to justify getting embroiled in a protracted legal battle and high attorney fees if she could be convinced to be proactive. Mrs. Hayward, would you be interested in learning about alternatives to giving Tommy power of attorney? Ways to protect your funds without having to give up control? The relief on her face was immediate. Yes, please, I love Tommy, but the whole thing has always felt wrong to me. Over the next hour, I explained the various legal tools available to protect the elderly from financial predators. Irrevocable trusts, financial monitoring services, court-supervised guardianships that required judicial oversight to make major financial decisions. All provided protection while maintaining Mrs. Hayward's independence and dignity. The most important point, I concluded, is that you do not have to make any urgent decisions. Regardless of what Tommy tells you, there is no emergency that requires you to sign away control of your life savings today. What if I tell him I'm not ready to sign anything and he gets angry? Then you will know his true motivations. Someone who truly cares about your well-being will respect your decision to be cautious. After Mrs. Hayward left, I spent the rest of the morning reviewing the files of my family protection practice. 13 active cases involving elder financial abuse, 7 successful interventions, stopping the theft before it began, 4 criminal referrals where family members had already started stealing money. The work was emotionally draining, but it was incredibly rewarding. Every elderly person I helped maintain their independence was a victory against the predatory system that had destroyed my own family. Every criminal referral was a crack in the network that viewed aging relatives as ATMs rather than living human beings worthy of respect. My phone rang, breaking my thoughts. The caller ID was a number I recognized but didn't expect to see. The federal prison where Jasper was serving his sentence. This is a collect call from a federal prisoner, Jasper Hernandez. Do you accept this charge? I hesitated for a long time, then accepted the call. Mom? Jasper's voice was much smaller than I remembered, lacking the confident arrogance of our last conversation. Mom, thank you for taking my call. What do you want, Jasper? I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, not because I'm in prison, but because I hurt you. Because I betrayed the one person who loved me unconditionally. This was the apology I'd fantasized about hearing for months, yet hearing it now it felt strange and anticlimactic. Why say this now? Because I've been in therapy. The prison psychologist has been helping me understand what I did and why I did it. I know it doesn't make up for anything, but I need you to know that I finally understand how monstrous I was. What did you understand? I understood that I had convinced myself you owed me everything just because I was your son. I convinced myself your success was something I was entitled to, rather than something you'd earned through hard work. I turned you into an obstacle to my happiness instead of viewing you as the person who gave me every opportunity in my life. The reflections were accurate and likely sincere, but they came too late to matter. Jasper, I'm glad you're getting help, but an apology doesn't erase everything you did. I know. I destroyed your trust, stole your money, and tried to commit you. I ruined your life because I was too selfish and entitled to build one of my own. You didn't ruin my life, Jasper. You changed it in ways I never anticipated, but you didn't ruin it. What do you mean? I looked around my office, at the files representing the people I'd helped, at the law degree I'd reclaimed and now used to protect vulnerable families. I mean that losing everything forced me to discover who I actually was. I spent 30 years accumulating wealth and status, but it wasn't until I lost it all and had to start over that I understood my own purpose. So, are you okay? I'm better than okay. I'm doing work that matters for people who need it. I'm using my skills to protect families instead of just hoarding money. In a strange way, your betrayal led me to the most meaningful work of my career. There was another long silence on the other end of the line. Does that mean you forgive me? It was a question I'd both dreaded and longed for. I'd spent months imagining this conversation, but now that it was happening, my answer surprised even me. I don't forgive you, Jasper. What you did is unforgivable. But I don't hate you anymore either. Hate takes energy, and I'd rather use that energy for something else. So what happens now? Now, you serve your time and figure out who you want to be when you get out, and I continue to help others, preventing them from suffering what you did to me. Are you willing to see me? I don't know. Maybe one day when enough time has passed and when you've proven that your apology is genuine and not just a matter of convenience. But that's a conversation for the future, not today. I understand, Mom. I know it doesn't mean much coming from me, but I'm proud of what you've accomplished. That newspaper article about your new firm said you're helping people who have nowhere else to turn. The newspaper article. Henry Blackwood's papers had been following my cases. They called me the guardian attorney because of how I protected the elderly from their own families. I hadn't realized my work was getting media attention, but it made sense that Henry would use his platform to highlight the ongoing problem of elder financial abuse. He had become a close friend and occasional partner since I returned to practice, his investigative resources proving invaluable in building cases against family predators. Jasper, I have to go. I have a client who needs my help. Of course, Mom. Thanks for taking the call. Goodbye. I hung up, feeling emotionally drained but miraculously calm. The conversation provided a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. It confirmed that Jasper understood the gravity of his crimes, but it also made me realize that forgiveness wasn't necessary in order to move forward. That night, I had dinner with Henry at our usual spot, a quiet place downtown where we could discuss ongoing cases without being overheard. He had become something between a father figure and a business partner, someone who understood the unique challenges of rebuilding a life after total betrayal. How did it feel after the call? He asked, cutting into his salmon with the precision of a man used to efficiency. Mostly relief. I spent months wondering if he'd ever admit to what he'd done. Now I know he understands, and somehow that matters less than I expected. Forgiveness is overrated, Henry said with his characteristic bluntness. Understanding is more important than forgiveness. Justice is more important than reconciliation. Is that what we achieved, justice? Look around you, Elma. You are a practicing attorney again, helping people who desperately need protection. Jasper is in prison, paying for his crimes. The Martinez network is exposed and dismantled. Because of the work we've done together, dozens of seniors are safer today. If that isn't justice, it's close enough. I thought of Mrs. Hayward and the relief on her face when she realized she didn't have to choose between family loyalty and financial security. I thought of the other clients I'd helped, the predators I'd exposed, the families I'd saved from destruction. You know the strangest part? I said. I'm happier now than I was before. When I had millions and a successful law firm, I was successful, but not particularly fulfilled. Now I have less money, but much more purpose. Money is a tool, not a goal. Losing everything is what taught me the difference between the two. And you? I asked. Do you regret getting involved in my affairs? Henry smiled, an expression that transformed his usually stern face. Elma, you saved my life too. If you hadn't stepped up during my trial, I would be spending the rest of my life in federal prison for crimes I didn't commit. We saved each other. After dinner, I drove back to my modest but comfortable townhouse, a place I'd chosen for security rather than status. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the motion sensor light illuminating my front garden, where I'd planted roses last spring. The roses were in bloom, their red petals vibrant even in the artificial light. They reminded me of the garden I'd lost when Jasper destroyed my old life. But these roses were different. These were planted in soil I'd prepared myself, supported by a life I'd rebuilt from nothing. Walking inside, I poured a glass of red wine, sat in my reading chair, and began reviewing the files I'd need for tomorrow's appointments. Mrs. Hayward's grandson, Tommy, had called her 3 times since our meeting, each time more insistent about getting that power of attorney document. Tomorrow, I would help her understand that his urgency was, in itself, evidence of his true intentions. As I worked, I realized something that would have surprised the woman who fled her mansion 8 months ago. I was content. Not the carefree happiness of someone who had never been betrayed, but the deeper satisfaction of someone who had been through the worst and found themselves stronger than they'd ever imagined. My phone rang again before bed. It was Henry, sharing news about a case we were working on together. The FBI wants to expand their investigation into the Martinez network. They think there are similar operations in other states, possibly coordinated by the same criminal organization. More families destroyed by people they trusted. If we can expose this pattern, we can help so many more families. Are you interested in consulting on a national level? I considered the offer, thinking of all the elderly people across the country who might be facing the same predatory conspiracies that had destroyed my relationship with Jasper. I'm interested, but I want to keep my local practice too. People here need protection just as much. Of course, Elma. Thank you for everything you've done. Not just for me, but for all the families you've helped. You turned your own worst experience into salvation for others. After Henry hung up, I sat quietly in my reading chair, watching the roses outside the window sway in the evening breeze. 8 months ago, I was a victim hiding from my own child. Tonight, I am an attorney helping others avoid the same fate. The transformation isn't perfect. I still miss the naive trust I once had in family, and I still feel a pang of grief occasionally for the relationship with Jasper that can never be repaired. But I learned a valuable lesson from my destruction. Sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment. It's proving that the people who tried to break you actually made you stronger. Tomorrow, I will help Mrs. Hayward protect herself from her grandson's schemes. Next week, I will testify at a congressional hearing on elder financial abuse. Next month, I will work with Henry to expose another network of family predators. And in all of this work, I will live out the lesson my son inadvertently taught me. True success is not measured by how much you accumulate, but by how much you protect. For the first time in months, I finally understood what true peace felt like. It wasn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of a purpose that no one could steal or destroy. I am home. Now I'm curious. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Have you ever experienced something similar? Let me know in the comments below. Also, I'll leave 2 of our channel's most popular stories on the end screen. They'll absolutely blow your mind. Thanks for watching until the very end.